9:15.
Okay, so we've got a little bit of time for questions for any of the candidates.
Mr. Chairman, what do you think a primary electorate looks like? You guys have gone a long time without a competitive statewide primary.
I'm sorry, what a
What do
primary
you think
electorate?
the primary electorate is going to look like?
The electorate or the election?
The electorate, who
electorate.
shows up?
Sure, sure. Well, one of the features of Minnesota's primary is that it's actually fairly late in the process, and so turnout has not been large. And so I think an accurate assumption would be that it'll be the people who participate historically the most that are probably the closest to the parties and or their candidates. We're going to do our best to try and drive up attendance and turnout. I don't even know if we had 10% turnout in the last election, in the last primary election. We're hopeful actually that the excitement of the contests will increase turnout and participation.
Is the party coming out of this unified, though, going into this primary election? What's this going to look like in the party to the voters?
Well, I feel like we are, and for those of you who are at the convention, you know, we really put, I think, a positive face forward. You look at the people that we had up making the presentations and how the face of this party has grown, I think, along the way that the core principles, the ideas, and the heart and the mind and the soul of the party actually got stronger as well. So I feel really good coming out of the convention, and that we're going to put a really strong foot forward. And with this team of candidates at the top of the ticket, we're going to do a great job representing our party for the people of Minnesota, and that's the purpose of today's fly around, is the very first step. We are on the side of the people. We're going to fight so hard for the families and the good, average, everyday folks in Minnesota in this campaign, and we're going to display that today, and I think we displayed it at the convention.
But you've got 4 candidates for governor in August out there, 4 Republican candidates, and perhaps Commissioner Johnson can answer that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll let Jeff answer.
You know, we went into the campaign expecting a primary because we had at least 2 and possibly 4 candidates who were talking about it. So we've been planning on this all along, and I think most of the delegates went into the convention expecting a primary as well. So I don't think it necessarily shows division within the party. I felt that, you know, there was a little monkey wrench towards the end of the last day, but that is past, and now we're moving forward, and I feel pretty good based upon the conversations I've had with Republicans all over the state. That endorsement matters.
And what do you need to do? What do you need to do to convince voters that you're the guy?
I share the same message that I shared at the convention. I think most people thought that we went into the convention as a little bit of an underdog at least. And I think the message of electability and being the strongest candidate against Dayton really was a strong selling point. And that is that there's a statewide base of support for Bill and for me based upon where he is from and who he is and where I'm from traditionally, and the fact that I have won big multiple times in Hennepin County and have been involved in Minneapolis now for the last 5.5 years. We can actually bring in new voters from every region of the state, and that's what we're going to need to beat Mark Dayton, and I think that's the message going forward with Republicans. And I'm going to focus on us, not on the other Republicans.
Does it make it more difficult for Republicans to say support our endorsed candidate against other candidates in the primary when it's very tippy competition that you want them to be running in the primary, whether or not you have endorsement?
I don't think so, because he's endorsed. So we're asking people to, I think when we talk about the endorsement, we're talking about the process of allowing the most active Republicans in the state to vet us up really, really close, which you can't do in primary, and decide who they think is the best candidate. And they took a look at all the candidates in the governor's race and all the candidates in the U.S. Senate race and picked the 2 that they thought were the best candidates. And I think they were good choices. So I don't think that is a problem at all, what has happened in the past.
Do you plan to tap into the public financing? The public campaign financing, you know, the subsidy?
Yes.
You're taking that?
Yes.
Okay.
Public geography, what do you think is the part of the state you have to win? You know, we heard about the soccer mom, the suburban soccer mom for so long. Is that still the holy grail of winning an election?
I'm not sure if it's quite as geographic as that. I think the key is that we've got to bring in more independents than we've brought the last few years. We got to win a majority of the independents and hopefully a handful of conservative, common sense Democrats.
How do you do that?
It's the message, and I think it's the way you deliver the message. It's being disciplined, and it's talking about those things that matter to people. It's not getting lost in the numbers that, you know, don't really appeal to. I mentioned this at the end of the convention. We as Republicans are good at winning people's minds because we speak logic and facts. but a lot of people vote with their hearts, and we have to do a better job of that, of telling stories about real people. Because when you look at something like MNsure, for example, and the effect that is having on real people and real families, it's not about a website that didn't work. It's about not allowing people the choice of their own health care.
So back
Would
to
you-
geography, where are those independents? Are they still in the suburbs? Are they in greater Minnesota? Are there key areas you've got to
Yeah,
win?
I think they're all over the state. They're probably more focused in the suburbs and in greater Minnesota than in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but there are a lot of gettable votes in the urban core as well. Maybe we're not gonna get to 40% in Minneapolis, but we can do better.
Commissioner, would you repeal MNsure?
Ideally, I would love to repeal MNsure, but it's not gonna happen in the short term. We're gonna have a DFL Senate for at least 2 more years, so I think you have to have a plan B. And the plan B is to remove as many barriers as possible to the private market to actually compete with MNsure, because if we get more competition into the marketplace, MNsure is gonna become less and less relevant, I believe.
What about minimum wage? The legislature this year passed a big hike to the minimum wage. What would you do with that as governor?
Going forward, well, it's already passed, so.
You could undo it. You could try.
Well, I
3
couldn't
years.
undo it, but, the legislature could undo it. I did not happen to think that that was a good policy. I don't think that a large increase in the minimum wage actually helps the people that we claim to want to help, which is often the case with the things that we pass in St. Paul. And I think what it's going to do in the long run is it's going to hurt young people and less educated people who are desperately looking for a job, maybe a part-time job, and there are going to be fewer of those.
Would you
It
roll
might
it
not
back?
happen next week, but it's going to happen in a year or two.
You could roll it back so it doesn't go as high in 3 years?
Well, I believe the governor can make efforts to stop the automatic increases, and we'll absolutely look at that.
What about the legislative office building? Would you try and stop?
Absolutely, yes. I think that is the biggest waste of taxpayer dollars that we have seen in a few years here. That one's very frustrating, I think, to Minnesotans, because there were other ways to deal with that problem rather than to spend $90 million or whatever the end number is now.
Commissioner, your running mate talked about folks have a sense of humor. Does that carry over? Are we going to see those black and white pictures in the ads, negative against the incumbent, or are you going to actually wage what you often call a positive campaign?
We will wage a positive campaign. I'm not going to be afraid to point out where I differ with Mark Dayton, though, and where I think he has really hurt Minnesota. I don't know if we're going to have grainy black and white pictures of him, because I don't think they work very well. I think, but we're going to be aggressive, and we're going to do it with a sense of humor. You can look at the one commercial we put out, but I'm not going to shy away from that. I think for us to win, we've got to both point out where Mark Dayton has failed Minnesota, and then probably more importantly, point out what we're going to do differently that's positive.
What about your fellow Republicans heading into the primary? Would you wage a positive campaign, or are you going to say no negative ads against fellow Republicans?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I have no intent of being negative about the other three in the race. I'm running against Mark Dayton, and my job is to convince Republicans in Minnesota that I'm the one who can beat Mark Dayton. And I'm not going to do that by tearing him down.
Well, let's focus on resources a little bit. It was clear that you spent a lot to win this convention vote. I don't know how much you have left in the bank. How are you going to raise enough money to be competitive in a primary, particularly against someone who can self-fund?
I don't know how much I have left in the bank right now. That's not, we've got enough to move forward. No, I mean, that is going to be, there are two jobs number one right now. One is to get around the state and start introducing myself to people outside of kind of the core Republicans, and number two is to raise money. And, money, frankly, none of us in the governor's office have raised at the pace that we need to raise, but that's not a surprise because there were too many strong candidates. The endorsement, I can tell you, has already made a difference. I was on the phone most of the day yesterday, and there were a lot of traditional givers who had been sitting on the fence who were waiting to see what the endorsement process brought forward. So I'm going to work my tail off. We're probably going to need to raise $1 million to win the primary, and maybe another 2.5 to 3 to win the general, but we'll do that.
And how helpful is it to the party that Mr. McFadden is now on the unified ticket and he can raise resources?
I think it's very helpful. And Rachel, I want to start by saying what you're seeing over the last week and for a while is the resurgence of the Republican Party in this state. I think Chairman Downey and his team has done a fantastic job. And I'll speak as an outsider. I was at the Lincoln Reagan dinner 2 years ago, and it was pretty down. And then I was there 3 months ago, and the mood in that room was 180 degrees different. The positivity, the feeling that we can win. People in this state are tired of one-party rule. There was a question about independence. The independents are concerned and tired and scared of one-party rule in Minnesota. We've never had that before. That's a problem. So the opportunity to have strong candidates, which you're seeing today, that are energized. I really appreciate Jeff's positive campaign. I noticed it in the governor's race. I've known Jeff for 25 years. He's a positive person, and I think you're going to see a lot of energy. I think we have a better way forward, and we look forward to speaking about it. And we're going to have the resources to make sure that we can communicate that effectively across the state.
I've never seen a candidate stress money before a convention as much as you did. You had it under lid, you stressed it from the stage and all of that. Why is that so important?
Well, we have a great message, which is how do we get this state back on the road to growth and prosperity? But in modern times, if you don't have the resources to get that message out statewide, nobody hears about it. And that's a big issue. That's a big issue, Rachel. And so you have to have the resources to get your message out. And we've proven that we can do that. And I mean, people think raising money is easy. It's not easy. It's hard work. You got to hustle. But what raises money is the message and the passion behind the message, and people's belief that the investment that they're making in candidates is going to have payments, that people can win, and we are going to win.
On that point, how soon and how heavy do you think you'll go up to make this kind of more of a general election feel in your race?
Brian, I'm
How
sorry.
soon and how heavy do you plan to go up with broadcast ads to make your race have a more of a general election
But
feel?
we're already up.
You're up on a very limited cable, I think, has been what you've done so far. I mean, how soon will
No,
most
we've done more than cable, but we will continue that. You saw our hockey ad and our Stitches ad, and just like Jeff talked here in our ads, we didn't talk about other Republicans. We have no interest in talking about other Republicans. I have every interest in the world in drawing contrast to Senator Franken. I think I have a better path forward than he does, and I want to compare records. So we'll continue to escalate this campaign, and I'm really looking forward to it.
In terms of negative ads, we've seen Senate races that have gotten sharply negative in Minnesota. Will you ask your allies from the outside to keep the negativity to a minimum?
Well, Rachel, as you know, I can't coordinate it all with outside.
So you can say right now that you would
I
like
can
them not
outside
to
the-
do it.
Everybody that has ever known in my whole life knows that I'm a positive person. I'm a glass half full. I mean, if there's a quarter of water in that glass, I think it's full. And that's the way I operate. It's the way I ran my business. It's the way I coach my football teams. You saw me, for 28 hours work the floor. I mean, I'm going to be positive. And I want to bring an enthusiasm. I might even be able to talk about it, an enthusiasm unknown to mankind. That's what I want to do. We can do better in this state and in this country. People are so tired of the same old beat down, trying to bring people down. And I think through every interaction, you have the potential to lift people up, including yourself, or bring them down. And I want to lift people up, and that's what I've spent my whole life doing. So it's not just trust me. I have a track record of doing that, and I think it's called for.
But I'm asking about outside groups. As you may know, in 2008, Norm Coleman, very late in the state game, said the outside groups stopped running the negative ads. He's pulled his negative ads because it had gotten too toxic in Minnesota. You can start this campaign making that request of your friends.
But you'll see the stuff that comes from our campaign.
So you're not making that request?
Well, I would love for everyone to run positive ads. I mean, if third parties would focus on the positive and on the vision and who has the best vision. Because Rachel, I think very specifically, I and we have a much better pathway forward than Senator Franken. So I would love if people focused on that. And I hope they heed my call, but I can't coordinate with outside groups. So I can say I hope that they run positive ads. Rachel, there was an article in the New York Times a week ago that a number of these third-party PACs have started running more positive ads. So I hope that's what we see here in Minnesota, but I can't control that. I know that's what the people of Minnesota want. They are tired of the negative, same old campaign. And when we jumped into this race, when I talked to Mary Kate and my kids about it, I mean, we know that it might get really ugly, that we'll get carpet bombed. I hope we don't. We pray that we don't. But we're as prepared as we can be for it. But I don't want my team doing that or engaging in that. I hope we can do better. I hope we can have a higher level of discourse. That would be fantastic, not just from my standpoint, but I know the people of Minnesota want that.
Same question Mary had for the commissioner. Any geographic area you have to focus on?
I think it's everywhere, Don. I mean, I think one of the issues in the Republican Party is that we've listened too much to consultants who say you gotta focus in these 7 precincts. I wanna preach our Republican message to everyone. You've heard me talk about the high school I've been involved with in the inner city, Crystal Ray and Phillips neighborhood. I like to, we have 100% graduation rate there. And these kids, if they went to the public school in the neighborhood down the street, statistics tell me that less than 50% of them graduate. And so they've learned, they've been given an opportunity and they've succeeded. And they've learned about their success. And I like to joke that I have 320 budding Republicans there. They don't know because nobody's spoken to them about it. So I think we got to preach our message everywhere. And my dad was a dairy farmer, and farmers, you look at the DFL, so farmers feel like they've been kicked to the curb by this current administration. They don't feel like the Democrats are for them. We're for them, and we'll fight for them. We need free and fair trade. We're the ones that will fight for that. When you look up, and they're increasingly flocking to the Republican Party, when you look at labor up in the Iron Range, I think unemployment up there is double digits. It's unacceptable. There are jobs waiting to be started up there if we have some sensibility brought to regulation. With the copper mines that want to be open, those have been under regulatory review for 7 years and $150 million. And so what I'd like to say is, we're all environmentalists here in Minnesota. Nobody wants to do anything to harm our lakes, but give us an answer. And waiting 7 years and spending $150 million is government at its worst. And the reason for it, because I've peeled the onion back a little bit, there's 7 separate regulatory agencies that have responsibility for this decision. 4 federal, 2 state, and sovereign nation, an Indian tribe. And that's why we have this inefficiency in regulation. So when we're up in the Iron Range and we're talking to labor, we're increasingly getting their support because they don't believe that they're being represented by the South Minneapolis Democrats. It's just not happening for them. And they want to be engaged. So I think there's a big opportunity for the Republican Party to, one, drive our base up. And they will drive up. I think we can get a tremendous number of independents. And I think we can make a dent into Democrats. I think those Reagan Democrats, those blue dog Democrats are there for the taking. If we spend time with them, and we're going to, and we're beginning today, that's why we have this flock around.
Chairman, talk about how much more the party can help these candidates than 2 years ago or years past.
Well, I think we'll have an unprecedented ground game that's already deployed literally today as we speak. The team that we hired and the locations that we leased are coming online today. So that will be at these folks' back. It'll be a rising tide that raises all boats. I wanted to jump in before and tell you when you're asking Mike McFadden about resources, literally that's a feature of who he is and what he brings to our overall campaign ticket. But those of you who are at our convention, you know he didn't win because of that. He won because of his passion. Anybody who listened to him on the 5th ballot speech and heard him speaking from the heart and saw him on that campaign floor and the way he went over those delegates one by one, hand to hand, that's why Mike McFadden is here today. His passion, his desire to reach out to those delegates, and that same desire that will propel him to reach out to every Minnesotan. That's why he's here, and that's why he's our endorsed candidate. And that, in the end, in addition to the resources side of it, that's what he's going to bring to this ticket, and that's why I'm really excited he's here today. Other questions for either the
Sure, Tony,
two?
is it overstating it to say this is a historic shift in the Republican Party to endorse a candidate who's going to a primary? Did electability win over purity? first time in a generation, maybe?
So I don't have the long history, because I'm a little bit of an outsider too, so I can't say whether it was historic. What I have asked of candidates from the very beginning is integrity. Say what you mean and do what you say. That's all we ask, right? And I believe by and large, with a couple of obvious exceptions, that has happened. And I mentioned that to the delegates as we wrapped up, that I felt like our convention had integrity, that we had conducted our affairs properly, and we had the great endorsed candidates that I knew we could come out with, and that we had the energy and the unity and the strength that I knew we could come out with. So I'm very pleased, whether it's historic or not, I don't know, but I'll tell you what, we are ready to go, and we are behind the people who are the candidates who are here today.
What about that focus though on electability after Republicans lost every statewide race? Was it a wake-up call and electability won?
Let me ask our governor and Senate candidates to answer that.
You know what's going to be historic? What's going to be historic is when we clean the table in November. That's going to be historic. We have an opportunity to take this state back. We right now have one-party rule. It's not healthy. It's not who Minnesota is. We've never been that. And so we're going to win the U.S. Senate. We're going to win the governorship, and we're going to take back the House. And that's going to be historic. And electability should always be the primary issue. We need to win. And we need to win with integrity, as Keith has said. And I am so proud of what Keith and his team have done. That, I mentioned earlier, this is the resurgence of the Republican Party in Minnesota. We have the better message, and we're going to yell about it. And we want as many people to join us as possible. Join the bus. The only thing I'm concerned about is if Thor is driving the bus. I told you, right?
He's not flying today, but.
Thor's not. So this is a great team. We're going to go forward and spread our message.
In terms of the message, before you leave the microphone, Mr. McFadden.
Yes.
You were criticized by Republicans, by the press, for not giving specifics, for flip-flopping on issues. Now that the convention is out of the way and you're straight to the primary and probably to the general, are you going to get more specific?
Rachel, I think I've been very specific. The person who hasn't been specific is Senator Franken. I encourage you to go to my website today. All your listeners, all your viewers, go to my website and then go to Senator Franken's website. Tell me who's more specific. I've answered questions. Sometimes you don't like the answers. And so we'll continue to be specific, and I look forward to it. I got a lot of energy for this race. I'm having a lot of fun, and I really look forward to campaigning and preaching our message over the next multiple months going into spring.
Well, for instance, you're running internet ads on reducing the debt, and then you go to your website, and there's a few talking points there. How exactly would you reduce the nation's debt?
Well, Rachel, there's a couple things we need to do. $17 trillion in debt is the number one issue in this country. Debt is more than doubled since Senator Franken took office, more than doubled. First, you have to address long-term entitlement spending. Republicans talk about that all the time. How do you do that? You need to look at Medicare. You need to look at Social Security. You need to look at other discretionary spending accounts. But those are the two big ones. The other thing that you have to do, Rachel, and it's as important, is you cannot solve this just by cutting spending. And I have to be absolutely as clear as I can be in the room on this. Not only do you have to address spending, you got to get this economy growing again. We've been growing at 1% GDP. That is a disaster. For the last 6 years, since Al Franken took office, we've absolutely gone flatline. Wages aren't increasing, every expense is going up. And when the economy doesn't grow, everyone suffers. So the way that you grow the government or the economy is the right size regulation. We need smart regulation, not over-regulation. And what I mean by that, Obamacare cost the equivalent of 2.3 million jobs. The carbon emission that President Obama and Senator Franken are promoting, the Chamber of Commerce just came out yesterday or last week and said that will cost the equivalent of 225,000 jobs and $50 billion a year. That's not how you get this economy going. Right-size regulation. And then we need to take advantage of the energy renaissance that we are sitting on the doorsteps of, which is truly, truly historical. We have not been energy independent and energy superpower since the early 1960s. And this, let us. So Rachel, so very specifically, I would pass Keystone Pipeline immediately, we'll have the votes to do it, one on in Washington. I would fast track the 24 LNG liquefied natural gas plants that are being permitted around the country, so that they don't have 7 years of regulatory review like we've seen up with Polymet and up in the Iron Range. The thing about energy is not only is energy the #1 source of high-paying jobs over the next decade, more importantly, with low-cost energy, we become a manufacturing superpower. Because with low-cost energy, we can manufacture competitively on a global scale. That's a game changer. That is a game changer. And if you grow the economy at 4 to 5% a year, as opposed to 1%, last quarter we grew at 1/10%. The difference is dramatic. And that's what I'll focus on. We got to get this economy rolling again. I know how to do that.
I don't remember your question anymore.
I do, electability,
Yeah.
electability.
That was a huge factor, and I think maybe more than some past conventions that I've been to. I heard that as, I called every single delegate. I didn't talk to every single delegate, but I tried to. And I heard we want someone who is principled and someone who is conservative, and we want someone with integrity, and we want someone who can win. And I think that's always in the back of people's minds, but there may have been more of an emphasis on that this year than in the past years. And I think that's one of the reasons that I did well, because I think that I was able to point out to people why I'm a stronger candidate against Dayton than others.
And quick specific for you, I've heard a lot on social media about you saying you're gonna go all Scott Walker.
Oh, yeah. I said that once at a meeting, because someone was, I don't even remember what the issue was. They were asking whether we would be able to do something, I don't remember if it was eliminate minshires, maybe something about the Met Council, which is a popular topic during this endorsement contest. And my response was, we're gonna have a DFL Senate for sure, because they're not up for election. And the difference between whatever that issue was and what Scott Walker did, because he was specifically mentioned, I believe, in the question, is that he had a Republican Senate and a Republican House. And we're not gonna have that. So you kinda have to have a plan B, and at least for 2 years, say, here's what we can accomplish, let's be realistic. Here's what we can accomplish, but you work towards doing more and trying to get a Republican Senate in 2016 and a Republican
Do you
House.
stand by that though? Do you plan to quote, go all Scott Walker in Minnesota?
Well, I think there's some things that he's done that have been really good. I think that, his style's a little different than mine, and so I probably wouldn't approach things exactly the same way. But I think some of the things he's done, particularly with public employee unions, to return some power back to people over the public employee unions has been a positive thing. It was very controversial, but now, as people have recognized what it's actually doing for the state, he's won re-election already, and he's at least got a great shot of winning again. So he's done some good things in the state.
Well, what would you do with public employee unions here?
Well, I think you have to look at, I would support right to work, but I don't think that that is realistic in the next 2 years. And I'm not sure that we've approached that in quite the right way, because it's become an anti-union thing, and it's not anti-union. It's pro-worker. It's just allowing people to have the choice between joining a union or not joining. And so I think that is a piece of it. And then I think when you look at some of the power that public employee unions have with respect to negotiating, we have tipped the scales a bit in their favor. And I think we ought to look at those things.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Question.